All right, here we are, week 13, last chapter. We're going to look at the family beleaguered when problems come calling. And basically what we're looking at here is how do families deal with problems? And what we're going to look at in this particular chapter will be what is the definition of problems within a family context? And what do we mean by that? Now, in sociology, when they look at family problems, some sociologists have looked at the dynamics of how is it that when problems introduced into the family, how does the family deal with this? And when they do, what's the result? And when they don't, why is that the case? And so we're going to look at how does the ABX model help us describe the response in the family system to problems. Now, the ABX model is one that's in your textbook, and I'm just going to briefly walk you through essentially how the model looks at family problems and how families cope. And then there will be what is the 7 strengths model of resilience? We'll touch on that. And then how can the ABX model be used to understand 2 family problems? I'm going to focus on chronic illness and alcoholism. And then lastly, what does communication play, what role does, or what part does communication play in problem solving? And that's what we're going to cover in this particular chapter. All right, so again, I'll remind you again that using the sociological imagination is very important. We've all had different experiences with family issues and family problems, and some of which might be covered here. And not everyone experiences in exactly the same way. So bear in mind that this is, if you will, bigger data perspective. We are standing on a very tall tower looking down on a lot of examples. Okay? All right, let's get started, and good luck, and here we go. All right, well, the first thing we kind of need to determine is, well, who determines what is a problem? Like, does the family decide, I have a problem, therefore it's a big problem, or do we have people who are involved in that process? While the public decides what a problem is, this is a subject to change over time. Some individuals are not felt to deserve as much protection as others. The main groups that make up the public often have competing interests, with the most powerful groups having vested interests, since they have a stake in keeping society as it is. Now, what is a family problem changes over time. What was once accepted as normal can today be seen as a family problem. For example, homosexuality was at one point seen as a family problem, but now it can be viewed as normal. Spanking, or worse. There were times when it wasn't considered a big problem. It was something that was kind of accepted. Today, it's not. It's seen as a problem. So when I mentioned those 2 groups, there was the groups, powerful groups having vested interests. Now, vested interests, the rich and powerful may not agree to their tax dollars going to people they think should pull up their own socks. Rather than seeing the long-term cost to people continually being disadvantaged and needing support longer, healthcare cost, housing support, so they have a vested interest. And that you could say that that includes all taxpayers have a vested interest, that their tax dollars are being spent appropriately for people who have legitimate issues. So in order to gauge who does and who doesn't, and who's entitled and who's not, there are what are called gatekeepers. Now, gatekeepers you can put in quotes. It's not like there's actual people standing at a gate letting people in and turning others away. But individuals recognized as having special expertise in identifying problems who control access to important people or important services. In Canadian society, gatekeepers would include doctors, police officers, judges, social workers, the people who would say, based on diagnosis or based on condition of law breaking or based on some other criteria, that you do qualify or you do not qualify. So not everyone in society defines problems in the same way. Some special interests or 2 groups or of 2 groups are similar, but may work together to change, to force change. So special interest groups can sort of lobby to bring their issues forward. Now, what you're seeing here is the ABX model, and it looks fairly straightforward, and it is. If you look at the ABC model, it explains how families respond to stressors based on the resources they have and how they perceive the stressor. Now this model came out of Reuben Hill's work in 1958, proposed that what he called the ABX model as a response to a new problem, where A refers to the stressor event, B refers to the impact of the stressor on the family resources, and then C refers to the way the family members view the stressing event. Now remember, in sociology, part of what's important, and if you remember from the symbolic interactionalists, they look at how does a family or how does an individual interpret and therefore define what is a problem for themselves and how they're able to cope with it. So it's a perception. Not everyone views the same problem in the same way. So C is that sort of family's view of how that stressing event is. And then the X represents the crisis that follows. And so what you see in this model here, they're using the example of the breadwinner loss of a job. And then goes on to the crisis of meeting resources. Well, they have some savings, they have employability skills, they have employment insurance, they have family support. And then their perception, well, they see themselves maybe as a victim, or they may see it as an opportunity, they may even lay blame. And then the crisis would be the result of this experience. So solutions may be functional. You may come up with good solutions to this, handle this in a positive way where the crisis is mitigated, or it may be dysfunctional, where you may not have very many resources, or you may not have a good way of seeing the stressor, in which case the crisis becomes more significant. There may be an increase in the family's ability to solve new problems, that's functional. They may have temporarily reduced family tension but created a new problem in the future, and that could be dysfunctional. If we look at the double ABX model, basically what's happening here is the family crisis evolves over time and pressures from various sources accumulate. So the double ABX model points to 5 stressors. There's the initial stressor and its hardship, that's the A. And then there's normative stressors in the family, what are considered the usual kinds of things. There's strains that began before the particular stressor. And then there's the effect of the family's coping. And then there's the ambiguity. The situation within the family or within the society may not be clear. And so you're having the typical ABC and X as the pre-crisis. And then the post-crisis would be the pileup of additional demands in conjunction with any adaptive resources that may be available to the family, and again, their perception of this experience. And as this continues to pile up over time, either there's a family maladaptation or a bone adaptation, and this is again either positive or negative. But this is done over time, and this is done as things accumulate over time. Now, one of the things that, or a collection, I guess would be a better way of putting it, of things that help or hinder a family would be that of resilience. Recently, researchers have focused on the family's ability to do well in the face of adversity. Resilience does not mean the best of a bad situation. It involves change, sometimes drastic, to produce a stronger and healthier adaptation. And there are 7 resiliencies developed and struggle with family challenges, and they are listed right here. You have insight. So one of the elements of resilience is insight, asking tough questions and giving honest answers. And this falls back to what I've mentioned in previous videos around the importance of communication. That it has to be, you have to be able to ask the tough questions and be able to answer honestly to those tough questions in order to have a realistic response and a realistic ability to see what the problem is. Independence is distancing oneself emotionally and physically from the source of trouble in one's life. When I've mentioned about standing on a tower and looking at society from a high spot, you don't see the details, but you see the bigger pieces and how they interact. Independence, about distancing yourself, is not to look closely at the discomfort and the pain, but to look back from it and see it from a bigger picture, if you will. And distance yourself from the emotionality and the physicalness of the source and see what information comes available. Relationships, making fulfilling connections with other people. It's one of the hallmarks of success for longevity in life and happiness is friendship and the connections you have with other people. Initiative, taking charge of problems, acknowledging, if you will, that first the problem is yours, and then taking responsibility for it and taking charge of that problem is a critical part of resilience. If I go around thinking that all these problems that are mine are actually somebody else's making problems for me, I won't feel like I can control them because somebody else controls them. I won't be able to change my life. But if I can own my troubles and take charge of my problems, then I have a better chance of making a change in them. Creativity is using imagination and expressing oneself in art forms. We could use creativity both for a way of, calming ourselves over time, but it also contributes to problem solving in a more creative way. Humor is finding the comic in the tragic. So part of what is resilience is knowing how you can laugh at yourself and be able to at least de-stress based on the use of humor. And then morality, acting on the basis of conscience rather than self-interest and practical conditions. So resilience is important to families' ability to deal with stress as it will arise in a family over time. Now, some specific family problems we'll look at. I mentioned about chronic illness and around alcoholism. So first we'll look at chronic illness. The illness itself is a continuing stress. So in a family, dealing with a chronic illness is ongoing and continuous. So that's where the double ABX model might play a significant role, especially if there's an unpredictable episode or if it's progressive and the prognosis is uncertain. In 2006, 14.3% of Canadians had some sort of disability. Developmental delays were the most common among young children, mobility and memory problems among older adults. Chronic illness or disability usually starts in one or two ways: suddenly or over a period of time. As an illness becomes chronic, stressors on the family pile up. And again, this is where you would be using the double ABX model to sort of evaluate and look at what are the conditions in this family to deal with these kinds of stressors. Family social activities may change. Added to these stressors are normative family changes that are expected as part of family cycle, puberty, growing independence of young people, finding a mate, having children, retiring. Chronic illness can have a different effect depending on the stage of life and of either parent or children. Family coping patterns can emerge. There will be dysfunctional coping. This is overprotection of the ill or disabled member, denial of the reality of the illness, anger and resentment toward that ill person. Or you can have functional coping, helping family feel in control, trying to understand the medical situation through communicating with others like themselves and the medical personnel, emphasizing family cooperation, accessing social support. Chronic illnesses are long-term often, and they don't tend to get better quickly. They may start fast or they may start slowly over time, but they don't end so suddenly. We could look at the alcohol family system, where acceptance of alcohol use varies among cultures. The economic impact of alcohol-related harm in Canada is estimated to be around about $14.6 billion per year. Personal and social cost, well, there's illness, an inability to fulfill family and work responsibilities, premature death, fetal alcohol syndrome. It can have a lot of effect on family, both short-term and long-term. Alcohol and substance abuse is defined by society. In 2009, 76.5% of Canadians reported drinking in the last 12 months. Now that in and of itself isn't the problem. It's the frequency of the problem, the circumstances of the problem. Are you drinking to be among friends and socially, or you're drinking to deal with problems that exist in your life. Entire family, not just individual, is involved when there's one alcoholic member. Now we revisit the double ABX model and apply it to alcohol abuse, and you see this example here. Alcoholism has a number of factors similar to chronic illness as well as differences. In alcoholic families, enablers allow the individual to continue to drink without suffering some extreme consequences. Family members may also be codependent. The lack of personal boundaries can takes on the drinker's problems, finding meaning and worth in caretaking. Believes he or she is responsible for whatever happens to the drinker and at risk of developing a stress-related illness. Alcoholism can have a profound effect on the marriage relationship. Communication may be affected. Alcoholics have a reduced ability to read nonverbal facial cues and emotions. Irritability during drinking bouts can alternate with excessive kindness during sober spells. Anger can escalate to violence. And so when you look at this particular model, remember now that with the double ABX model, what we're seeing in this particular example is from the crisis, which is a car accident, but the alcoholism has already begun in the first ABCX. We're into the pile up and resources and perception and the coping from either the bono adaptation or maladaptation. So if we carry on, specific family problems, alcohol family, members of an alcohol family can learn a number of lessons about family life. That alcohol is the center of family life, that alcohol can make things better. This is how they interpret what's going on, and alcohol abuse is a family secret to be covered up. So these are members of an alcoholic family. This is what they learn about their family life. This pattern of coping has its cost for the non-alcoholic family members. There's anxiety, depression, shame, anger. Children of alcoholic parents are more likely to display behavior problems themselves. Often alcoholism is not admitted until there's a decisive event makes denial impossible. So in your double ABX model, it was a car accident. Under the influence, that's where you can hardly make the denial impossible. When alcoholic member stops drinking, however, there may be a crisis of sobriety. The family still has its old patterns and has to learn new ones. So when we think about whatever the family problem is, there are many solutions, but the bottom line often comes down to communication and problem solving. As families encounter problems, they must find solutions if they are to cope. Families who can talk openly about their feelings, adapt to problems, and provide valuable emotional and practical support to each other. Adapt relatively well to chronic illness and disabilities. Families with more effective problem-solving skills usually communicate more clearly. We've talked about it periodically throughout this particular course, but the importance of communication is paramount to success of any relationship as it results to family sociology. I hope if you take anything away from family sociology is the importance of open and honest communication with your partner and your children towards the end of a successful and happy family life. It's enriched not only, but predominantly by open and honest communication. So good luck with your next semester. I hope you enjoy your break in the summer if you have a break. If you're back at school in the summer session, good luck to you. It's been a pleasure teaching and offering you this online experience. And thank you very much for your journal entries. They've been informative and very thoughtful in many cases. And I've enjoyed this particular course a lot, and good luck to all of you on your future endeavors. Bye now.